In 1979, in Fort Worth, Texas, a seemingly normal family's life took an unexpected turn. What can lead a mother to choose between her daughter and a new husband? What decisions can make the difference between reconciliation and tragedy? The answers to these questions are as shocking as the scene the officers discovered that fateful night. How did a family reach such a breaking point? It all began in 1974, with the love story of two young people who promised a bright future. If you're fascinated by unraveling the darkest mysteries and exploring gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and become part of our investigative community. Let's dive into the case. Stephen and Beth Lomer were the picture of a perfect couple. She, a talented athlete and student leader. He, a charismatic young man with big dreams. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and, after their wedding, life took them down challenging paths. The arrival of their daughter Marie in the summer of 1976 seemed to cement their love. However, constant moves due to Stephen's military service tested the strength of their union. When the family returned to Fort Worth after Stephen's service, the problems were already undeniable. Beth began to describe him as brooding and unpredictable, unable to hold down a job. In 1979, she finally decided to separate, taking Marie with her to a new city. Despite the distance, Marie spoke of her father with warmth, maintaining an intermittent but close relationship. Fate took a turn when Beth met Frank Barrows, a former Navy officer turned cop in the quiet town of Granbury. A strict man with unbreakable rules, he accepted Beth and his daughter into his life, but with clear conditions. Marie had to cut off contact with her biological father. This imposition would mark the beginning of tensions that would change the course of all involved. Though young, she understood the weight of the decisions others made for her. Her talent in music and her ability to adapt could not prepare her for the rash decisions she was about to face. What would happen next left indelible scars on all who knew her story. Voices could be heard all through the small Granbury house. It was impossible not to hear the arguments that had become commonplace. The relationship between Marie and Frank was at its most critical point, with Beth caught in the middle of two crossfires she could not control. The daughter's tears seemed useless in the face of the cold stare of her stepfather, who, true to his unwavering principles, made it clear that there would be no exceptions. The days at the grandparents' home in Fort Worth had been a painful reminder to Marie of what she had lost. Upon returning to Granbury, her only intention was to get her mother back. However, the reception was a devastating blow. Frank stood firm in his rule, and Beth, torn, decided not to challenge him. For Marie, this rejection felt like an unforgivable betrayal. That night, the atmosphere in the house was stifling. Beth tried to comfort her daughter, while Frank watched from a distance, impassive. "Marie, this is for your own good. You need stability, and you will only find conflict here," Frank said. But his words only fueled the young woman's anger. Marie knew she would not be welcome back under that roof. For days, she wandered the streets of Granbury, facing the harsh reality of being alone. Each step brought her closer to a dark determination that would change her life forever. Frank, for his part, justified his stance with a sense of order and discipline that had governed his military life. For him, allowing Marie to return would be an act of weakness. But behind that rigid facade, there was growing tension. Neighbors were beginning to murmur, and Beth was on the verge of an emotional breakdown. It was becoming increasingly clear that Frank's decision was fracturing the family. When news of Marie's return reached the ears of her former schoolmates, some tried to offer her help. However, the young girl's pride prevented her from accepting. She took refuge in her music, playing the clarinet late into the night, as she planned what she would do to regain control of her life. The clash between adult decisions and youthful feelings had reached a point of no return. Every day was a reminder of the invisible scars this conflict would leave on all involved. The denouement was still far away, but the cracks in the family structure were already irreparable. The stillness that surrounded Marie in her father's house contrasted with the whirlwind of emotions within. Despite Stephen's attempts to fill the emotional void with activities and quality time, the distance from her mother was a burden she could not ignore. Every call to Beth became a heartbreaking plea that left an echo of helplessness and frustration on both ends of the line. In the walls of the small apartment, tensions grew quietly but steadily. Marie kept a serene face, but inside, the wounds were still open. During the nights, she wrote in her diary, a space that became her only refuge to capture the emotions she could not express out loud. Her words, full of despair, described the emptiness of a life without a mother's warmth. The relationship between Stephen and Sandra began to show cracks. Although the woman tried to be understanding and supportive, the intensity of the father-daughter bond, coupled with Marie's emotional instability, created an increasingly tense atmosphere. One evening on his way home from work, Stephen found Marie sitting in front of the window, with the newspaper open and tears in her eyes. He decided it was time to act. Stephen called Beth, demanding that they meet to discuss his daughter's welfare. The meeting took place at a discreet cafe in Fort Worth, where memories of their former relationship mingled with concern for the present. Beth insisted that Frank was the main obstacle, while Stephen pointed to Marie's emotional fragility as the priority. After that meeting, the teenager seemed to find a new way to channel her emotions. She became involved in school activities, managing to regain her grades and gaining recognition from teachers and peers. However, the change was only superficial. At home, nights were still marked by long hours of sleeplessness and a constant review of the events that had brought her to this point. On May 3, 1992, as the family shared a seemingly quiet dinner, she made a comment that chilled the atmosphere. "Sometimes I feel like this is all a lie that I can't take anymore." Stephen tried to minimize it with a joke, but Sandra noticed the intensity in the young girl's eyes. It was a brief moment, but enough to seed an unease that would grow over time. Despite the facade of normalcy, something dark was brewing in Marie's mind. The night of February 18, 1993, began like any other. Stephen returned home with Marie and Sandra after picking up Mexican food for dinner. The meal was quiet, marked by polite exchanges, but an underlying tension that had grown between Stephen and his daughter. After eating, Stephen left for a brief church service, leaving Marie and Sandra at the apartment. An hour later, Stephen returned, visibly unwell. His pale complexion and the hand clutching his stomach immediately alarmed Sandra, who rushed to his side. "It's probably just indigestion," Stephen said weakly, brushing off her concern. But within minutes, his condition worsened. Pain shot through his arms, his breathing grew labored, and he struggled to swallow. Marie, wide-eyed and frozen at first, suddenly bolted to Sandra's side, yelling, "Call 911!" as Stephen collapsed onto the couch. While Sandra frantically explained his symptoms to the operator, his body began to convulse violently. Foam formed at his mouth, and the color drained from his face. Marie stood paralyzed, watching helplessly as the rescue team arrived and fought to open his blocked airway. The paramedics worked quickly, but Stephen's condition spiraled out of control. Within minutes, he was pronounced dead in the ambulance before reaching the hospital. He was 38 years old. The following days were a blur for Marie. At the coroner's office, the cause of death was ruled a heart attack, triggered by symptoms consistent with chest pain, nausea, and difficulty breathing. Toxicology tests were not conducted due to the lack of advanced equipment, and the case was closed without further investigation. At Stephen's funeral, the weight of the loss settled heavily on Marie. As she stood at her father's grave, she felt more alone than ever. Her mother, Beth, approached her cautiously after the service. "Marie, I've made some decisions," she began hesitantly. "I'm leaving Frank. I found a job in Florida and I want us to start over, together." Marie turned to her mother, her face a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. "Why now?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Beth struggled to hold back tears. "Because I should have chosen you a long time ago," she replied, her words trembling with regret. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Beth finalized her plans to move to Panama City, Florida, where she had secured a job as a secretary. Marie, still processing her grief, packed her belongings and left Fort Worth behind. Despite the promise of a fresh start, the shadows of her father's death and her fractured relationship with her mother loomed large as they embarked on their new life. Life in Panama City was tense for Marie and Beth. Beth tried to create stability, but Marie's grief over her father's death and lingering resentment toward her mother kept a quiet distance between them. By late 1993, things took a turn when Frank reached out, apologizing for his past and promising to change. To Marie's horror, Beth entertained the idea of reconciling with him, convinced he deserved another chance. When Beth shared her intentions, Marie's reaction was swift and explosive. "How can you trust him again?" she yelled, her voice breaking. Beth insisted Frank had changed, but Marie refused to live under his roof. She declared she missed Texas and wanted to return there with her mother. Beth, however, had made up her mind to rejoin Frank. Feeling betrayed, Marie contacted her grandfather Jim in Mansfield, Texas. She begged to live with him, and though hesitant, Jim agreed. Within weeks, Marie packed her belongings and left Florida. Once in Mansfield, life settled into a quiet routine. Marie excelled academically and contributed to her grandfather's household, earning praise for her dedication. Yet, she remained emotionally guarded, keeping a distance from her peers. At school, she befriended Stacy, a popular and outgoing student. Despite their differences, the two grew close over a shared love of literature. One afternoon, while reading Hamlet, Stacy recited a passage about a potion. Marie froze, her face pale. Stacy's concern was met with silence, and the moment passed without explanation. Weeks later, Marie broke down. She confessed to Stacy that she had taken a chemical from her school's lab and added it to her father's food the night he died. Sobbing, Marie insisted she never meant to kill him, only to make him sick enough for her mother to take her back. The guilt had consumed her ever since. Stacy, shocked, promised to keep the secret but struggled with the burden. She eventually confided in her mother, who contacted poison control. Their concern left Stacy even more uneasy. At a family dinner the following February, when Jim spoke in memory of Stephen, Marie burst into tears. Days later, Stacy reported her friend's confession to the school counselor, setting off an investigation. The months following Marie's confession were marked by uncertainty. Stacy struggled with guilt, questioning whether telling the school counselor had been the right choice. Her internal conflict deepened as the investigation stalled due to the lack of proper equipment at the local lab. Advanced technology was only available in major cities, delaying the toxicological analysis by 3 months. During this time, Stacy began avoiding Marie altogether. The once close friendship disintegrated as Stacy found it unbearable to face her friend, especially after knowing the weight of her secret. When they graduated high school and moved to different colleges, Stacy felt relieved. She believed the chapter was closed, assuming the case would fade into obscurity. But in October 1994, Stacy's hopes of leaving the past behind were shattered. A Fort Worth investigator called to inform her that the lab results were finally in. The analysis confirmed that Stephen's body contained a chemical exceeding permissible levels by 250 times, a discovery that changed everything. Marie was arrested at the University of Texas at Austin, where she had built a quiet reputation as a kind, diligent student. When questioned, Marie confessed immediately but insisted she had no intention to harm her father. She repeated that her only goal was to make him sick so she could return to her mother. Her miscalculation, she said, had haunted her ever since. Society's reaction was deeply divided. Some condemned Marie as a danger to society, while others sympathized with her desperation. Many pointed fingers at Beth, blaming her decisions for pushing her daughter to such extremes. On October 28, 1994, Marie was released on bail into her mother's custody as the courts deliberated how to proceed. Given that she was 17 at the time of the incident, her case required special considerations. However, in the spring of 1995, prosecutors decided to charge her as an adult due to the severity of the crime. Beth posted a $10,000 bail, allowing Marie to await trial at home with her and Frank. In May 1995, as Marie turned 19, the trial began. Beth used $60,000 from Stephen's life insurance to fund her daughter's defense, hiring 2 prominent attorneys from Fort Worth. The defense argued Marie acted out of emotional distress, with no malicious intent, while the prosecution emphasized premeditation, suggesting the insurance payout as a possible motive. Stacy's testimony, detailing Marie's emotional turmoil, became a cornerstone of the trial as the case unfolded. Details about Marie's youthful plans caused bewilderment. The possibility that she had contemplated arson or resorted to other extreme measures was presented as evidence of a mind obsessed with regaining control of her family life. However, the defense insisted that these ideas were mere fantasies, born of a deeply disturbed emotional state. The testimony of Jim, the paternal grandfather, brought a human nuance to the trial. In a steady voice, he recalled moments shared with his granddaughter and assured the jury that Marie was incapable of intentionally harming someone she loved. She adored her father, despite everything, he stated as his eyes filled with tears. Her presence generated a strong impact among the attendees, and her testimony was received with respect. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the courthouse, reporters rushed to cover every twist and turn of the case, looking for details that would capture the public's attention. Marie's name was on everyone's lips, from local journalists to national news programs. The young woman, until then a seemingly average student, had become the center of a public debate about justice, morality, and the impact of dysfunctional family environments. The turning point of the trial came when the jury returned with the verdict, after lengthy deliberations. Family and friends gathered in the courtroom as Marie, hands trembling, avoided looking around. The judge read the sentence in a solemn voice, stressing the importance of balancing punishment with rehabilitation. The final decision divided opinion, but offered a resolution that, while painful, marked the end of a turbulent chapter. She was sentenced to 28 years, with the possibility of parole after 7 years. After the verdict, Marie was escorted from the courtroom as her mother, Beth, tried to maintain her composure. Advocates continued to work on the appeal as the days in prison began for the young woman. Inside the prison, Marie was assigned to a rehabilitation program that included intensive psychological therapy and educational activities. During her time in prison, Marie kept her distance from other inmates, focusing on her studies and writing long letters to her mother. These letters became an intimate record of her thoughts and emotions, showing a constant search for redemption. As the years passed, his relationship with Beth grew stronger, although the wounds of the past were never completely closed. In 2003, after serving 8 years, Marie was released on parole. Under a new name and with a protected identity, she disappeared from the public eye. Only a few know the details of her new life, while the rest merely speculate about what happened after her release.